Hello, friends. Welcome to the Financially Simple Experience. Today's big question is, do taxes matter? Now, for those of you who've been following us on the Financially Simple podcast or the show, you know, occasionally we go live. Today was one of those days we wanted to go live because of the content of today's show is one that's not only for we business owners, but it actually can be applicable to non-business owners as well. So I wanted to go live today on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. We're out there live at this particular point. You can check us out on YouTube as well. But I want to deal with taxes. You're like, dude, seriously? Yeah, seriously. Whenever we're dealing with the wealth gap, there's probably no stronger hindrance to our bridging of this gap than taxes. You say, Justin, what's the wealth gap? Well, I'm going to challenge you to go back and listen to the Financially Simple podcast. For those of you who had just joined us on social media, you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. We're actually ranked in the top 10 on several different categories on iTunes as it relates to finance, especially finance for business owners. But I introduced this concept called the wealth gap a few weeks ago on the podcast, and we're still answering that. As you can tell, we're in the studio here at the Financially Simple studio. So what is a wealth gap? A wealth gap is the difference between where you're at today financially and where you want to be. So the story I've given, or this picture in our heads that I've been giving is, some of you may know I live out on the Tennessee River down in Kingston area, Tennessee, which is, for those of you not familiar with Eastern Tennessee, it's about 45 minutes west of Knoxville. Our office is in West Knoxville, and I drive about 45 minutes west to our house, and we live right on the river. It's a gorgeous little place, and I want you to imagine going down to the riverbank with me, like my boys and I do sometimes, or my neighbors and I, we go swimming on the river with the kids. But imagine going down to the riverbank and looking on the other side, and you say, hey, I want to get from where I am today to there, wherever there is. Directly across the river from us, it's about a mile wide, there's this gorgeous double-decker dock. And let's make the assumption we wanted to get from our side of the river to that gorgeous double-decker dock on the opposite side of the river. There's a lot of things that could prevent us from reaching the other side of the river, especially if we're going to try to swim, right? You might say, dude, I can't make it across the river. Well, perhaps you can't, but that's nonetheless something that we could look at. Wind. We were out on the tubes this last year, and we were on the tubes and we're paddling backwards, and the wind would come down the main channel of the river and it would blow the tubes back into the shore. So wind is a major one. The current of the river would keep us from reaching the other side exactly where we wanted to be, and so we'd have to constantly adjust if we were trying to paddle the tube across the river, so to speak. Whenever we're moving toward our goal, especially with wealth gap, we want to pay attention to some things that could blow us away or move us or hinder us from reaching our destination. So the idea being we know where we're at today in our wealth, and we know where we need to be to accomplish whatever goal we're trying to accomplish. And now there's a gap in between. There's nothing that I can think of stronger in terms of a current or a wind than the Internal Revenue Code or taxes. So I wanted to come live today and share some things that I found, and I'm going to have lots of quotes, lots of sightings of some research, and a lot of things come from the Tax Foundation or the Bradford Tax Institute, and we'll have those on the blog, financiallysimple.com. For those of you who don't know, we have a top 10 podcast. We have a nationally recognized blog with 800 different articles on there, not to mention the social media that you follow us. So if you want to sign up for our newsletter, go to financiallysimple.com and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get our weekly, I think it's weekly, might be every other week newsletter at this point. One of my dear friends, Chris Mahan, whom I'll have on the podcast here in the next couple of weeks, he made a statement to me 3 years ago when we had him on the last time he was on the show. He said, Justin, the Internal Revenue Code is the greatest wealth creation tool in the United States. I'm like, man, that's a bold statement. And when he said that, I kind of looked like a calf looking at a new gate. Kind of looked at it sideways, scratched my head, like, dude, that's a big statement. The Internal Revenue Code is the greatest wealth creation tool? And if you think about it, if you ever read the code, which you probably haven't, no one ever does except for us nerds, the Internal Revenue Code has a small amount, maybe a quarter inch, maybe an eighth of an inch worth of writing. It says how much taxes we have to pay. The rest of the code, a significant portion to the tune of 2 or 3 inches, depending on if you're reading the abridged version, shows you how not to pay those taxes. It actually shows you deductions and exemptions and various techniques you can use. And he's right in that sense. So today's tax rate, the tax bracket is for the highest bracket is 37% for the highest income earners. So for single filers, if you're making $518,000, then you're paying a highest bracket on the federal side, 37%. If you're married and making $622,000 or higher, you're paying 37%. You're like, well, that's not too shabby. Or, Justin, I'm not going to make $600,000 in our business. I'm only making $100,000 or $200,000, whatever the number is for you and your particular business. What does all these numbers mean for us? Well, we've had a major event that I'm going to go through this toward the end of this podcast and kind of bring it all to a head. But the CARES Act printed $3.6 trillion of money in the United States. And in order to understand how taxes will, and I say that with big, bold W-I-L-L, will, and all my team just said, no, don't spell. Yeah, I can't spell with a flip. Can't spell flip. It's okay. I can handle it. We know that the Internal Revenue Code will affect us. But how? How? Well, in order to understand the future or the wind that's coming in our face as people who are trying to save money, whether you're a business owner or not, to understand how we are going to be affected on our journey to grow the wealth that we need, we have to kind of look backwards. We have to look backwards in history to understand some things. So whenever we look at historical tax brackets, if I look back in like 1984, the lowest bracket, if you think about a ladder, so to speak, rungs on a ladder when you're climbing it, the lowest bracket was $3,400 and the highest bracket was $162,000. Not bad. If we went to about 1989, the lowest bracket was $30,000. The highest bracket was $30,000. It didn't move much. Then all of a sudden in the 90s, it started spreading. And in fact, on 1994, the highest bracket jumped to $250,000 and the lowest bracket stayed at $38,000. So it would begin to be a spread between high income earners, as they say. We're paying more taxes than people not making as much money. And if we fast forward all the way to present, man, it's an arbitrage. $622,000 paying 37%, and if you're making less than about $75,000, you're paying less than about 10% effective, or less than that for an effective rate. So our brackets have moved. But I want to share a graphic with you to kind of break down this idea of how taxes affect. This is an amazing piece of information. I want to share it over here with you. What you'll see here is a calculator I found over time that lets us look at what individuals paid in taxes. So let's go to a married calculator, and let's say that somebody making $50,000. And you can see way back here in 1913, if you were making $15,000 today, you were paying roughly, in 1913, 1%. So in 1913, if you were looking at a position of $50,000 at today's dollars, you're paying 1%. Well, then what happened? What happened is World War II kicked in, and all of a sudden in about 1943, your $50,000 would have been roughly a 20% tax bracket. And as a present, it hasn't moved much. You're still about 17.1%. So if you made $50,000 today, for about the last 70 years, it hasn't moved much. But let's be honest. We business owners, we don't want to focus on just making $50,000. That's not the intent. We want to look at earning more money. In fact, the majority of business owners that we work with produce considerably higher than this in taxable income. So what does that mean for them? If we have somebody here producing somewhere in the neighborhood of about $100,000 in today's dollars, then they're paying roughly an effective rate of 21%. Way back in 1932, they were paying 23%. You say, Justin, I make more than $100,000. Let's say that you're in the $500,000 range. I want you to look at what happens at this major increase from about 1937 to 1942. And I kicked it up for those of you who are listening on Audible format. I kicked the bracket up to married income making $500,000 in today's dollars. And if you were making $500,000 in today's dollars, way back in 1944, you were paying an effective rate of 51%. And as we move forward to early 1980s, you got as high as 61% in taxable income. You say, holy cow, Justin, that's ridiculous. Yeah, it got a little high there. Again, let's go back to somebody making $100,000 in today's bracket. If at $100,000, they would have jumped up from a 5% effective rate up to a 23% effective rate. That's a 4x increase from 1939 through 1942. Think about paying 4 times the amount of taxes. And someone making $100,000 in the 1981, you spiked out about 37.9% in effective tax rate. I'm sorry, in your effective federal tax rate. What does all that mean? Look, taxes are going to cause us some problems. Will Rogers said that the difference between death and taxes is death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. If we look at what happened, we have to go back and understand where taxes came from. Taxes actually are a result of or came out of the Prohibition era. In fact, Lynn Novak, who was the co-documentarian for the PBS series called Prohibition, said, and I quote, "I had no idea the importance liquor was to the federal government. It started in the Civil War with the levy on beer and whiskey to help fund the war. And it really never went away. Some 30 to 40% of the government's income came from the tax on alcohol. So prohibitionists realized that the only way they were going to have a ban was through income tax." And this is where income tax came. And I continue my quote, "which was a progressive cause and was really supposed to distribute wealth." Think about what they're saying. This is a historian who's gone back and actually built a documentary on income tax. So she said, the prohibitionists realized the only way they were going to have a ban was through income tax, which was a progressive cause and was really supposed to distribute wealth and to make things equitable during the robber baron era, where the wealth was being accumulated in a very small segment of the population, end quote. So in 1913, the 16th Amendment was born, and it gave us a levy, gave taxing power to the government on our income. And the rest to say is history, right? So in 1913, the highest bracket was 7%. We saw that earlier. Someone making $50,000 in 1913 would only pay about 2-3-4% in total income taxes. And those who are in the highest tax bracket, today's dollars roughly 11 million, would pay 7%. Okay. World War I came along right after the income taxes, and we had to have dollars to fuel the war. And so we saw the highest level move to 15% in 1916, then it jumped up to 67% in 1917, and finally it ended up at 77% of the total income in 1918. War was expensive, and it always is expensive. And then after the war, the rates dropped down for the highest brackets down to 25%, but the Great Depression came in, and we saw rates move from 25 to 63% again to the highest top earners. And after that, we had the New Deal. And then we started seeing some of the rates start stair-stepping down until our present position. What does all this mean, and why do I give a flying flip about history of tax brackets? Here's why. This year, we generated $3.6 trillion in stimulus money because of COVID. Let me give you some relative positioning on this. The Great Recession had a $1.8 trillion stimulus package. $1.8 trillion. We're 2 times that of the recession in stimulus. Government printed money, creating money for the benefit of the country. We're 2 times that of what it was in 2008-9. Let's compare it to the New Deal. The New Deal was $856 billion. If you adjust for inflation, the dollars that was actually created through that stimulus package. So we are a ridiculous amount of money more than the New Deal. What happened right after the New Deal of 1933? Let me go back to my chart to show you. Right after 1933, the New Deal kicked in, and then we ended up seeing the brackets move. Now, does this mean it's going to shift again from whenever the New Deal transpired in 1933 in brackets for someone, let's go back to our $100,000 scenario, someone making, $100,000 in today's dollars back in 1933 would have had a 5% effective tax rate. And then all of a sudden, here we go, it jumps up in that 26-27% range. Is it possible yet again to see that happen? Possible. It is possible. What does that mean for us? I firmly believe, and I think most people would agree with me on this, that whenever you print or whenever you create, and people are going to get on to me for saying printing, go ahead and leave me a nasty gram on Twitter whenever you're reading this and say, Justin, you don't have a clue what you're talking about, whatever. Whenever you create the dollars through the stimulus package that our federal government did, it is my belief, and I have this strong belief, and so do many others, we believe our tax rates will drastically increase. We believe the tax rates will drastically increase and go up. So what do we do about it? Let's go back a little bit. What was the idea on this whole point? Is, friends, you're standing here today, wherever here is for you personally, and you need to have your wealth grow to whatever your number is. I challenge you, if you don't know how to calculate it, listen to the last few episodes. I've been dealing with this. If you need specific help, hey, reach out to us. We do this day in, day out. But nonetheless, you know where you're at today. You know how much your net worth is, and you know how much your net worth needs to be. I hope you do. If you don't, then we need to have a destination, you need a roadmap. You're going through life with no direction, brother. We got to get you on the same page so you know how fast you're going. I spoke last week in the podcast and said our kids often say, are we there yet? Because they have no reference of time. And the last thing you need in your financial world is to say, are we there yet? Because you have no reference of time, how every year is getting you closer to an unknown destination. We got to get your points of reference. As we go forward to the next 3 or 4 episodes, we're going to dive deep into taxes and how they will change. Should we use tax-free growth of a Roth IRA, given the assumption that taxes will jump up? We're going to look at that. Should we use Roth 401k? What about our taxable accounts? How do we deal with those? What are the pros and cons? All of these go into our wealth calculation. We're going to conclude the tax portion of our wealth gap by looking at a real-life case study that we have seen just firsthand 2 weeks ago in our office, where a business client significantly reduced their taxes, or will reduce their taxes with the help of the planners and their tax consultant over this year, because of the unbelievable year they're having in their income. So look, taxes do matter. We can see what happened historically after the New Deal transpired. We saw an increase in tax rates, and it was that way for some years. We're at a pretty low tax rate right now. How you handle taxes will help you determine if you can reach the other side of the river, the proverbial river that we're talking about. Will you make your destination, whatever it is? Friends, if you're not thinking into the future, chances are you're going to be like me, trying to swim across that river, not thinking about the wind or the current, and you're paddling your heart out through that river, swimming as fast as you can, this proverbial thing that we call life, and you're going to wake up on the other side or realize, look up, and you're a long ways from where you desired to be because of the movement of taxes. We spoke about inflation a few weeks ago. Now we're on taxes. So friends, my challenge to you is this. Let's calculate your wealth gap. Let's figure out where you're at and how much more work you need to do to get to where you need to be. And if you don't know how to do that, hey, buddy, reach out to us, man. This is what we do day in, day out for male, female, business owners, non-business owners, every single day. We got a group of planners here who are rock stars. And this is what we're a bunch of nerds. I get it. But this is what we do. We love it. We love working in this avenue called finance. Look, we all have a wealth gap. What's yours? Until next time, friends, I realize that life is hard. I do. I realize that. But life is good. Life is good. I mean, we're having a time of our life. Life can be frustrating. It can be. Man, figuring out that the IRS and Congress wants to take some money because of the tax rules, it's just a matter of knowing how to deal with it. Life can be frustrating, but money doesn't have to be. We're going to continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Hey, y'all go out and make it a great week.